My name is D Jameson, and I'm a film critic and a writer, and I've written some articles about Inception that people have liked, or rather that they didn't like, and some people asked me to further explain my criticisms of the film. So today I thought we could look at the first three scenes in Inception and watch them a bunch of times, commenting on different aspects of the film. And this is something I often do when I'm preparing for a class or writing about a film. I'll watch some part repeatedly to better understand how it was all put together. Doing this helps keep me from zoning out or becoming too engrossed in the story, which is very easy to do. So we'll watch the opening three scenes 4 times, although you will doubtlessly want to watch this video over and over again and click that you like it, and share it on Facebook and Twitter, and mention it to all of your friends. Okay, so on our first pass, let's look at just the number of scenes and the number of shots, because I'd argue that Nolan is using way more shots and also more scenes than he really needs to. In fact, I've already written an article critiquing this opening, explaining how Nolan could have simplified it, and I'll include a link to that below. Now you may be wondering, who cares? What's wrong with cutting a lot? Well, nothing really, and some films and some scenes require a lot of cutting. But in general, a cut should accomplish something. It should feel necessary. Otherwise, they start losing their impact. They stop registering and become more like a habit or a tic. Also, notice all the repetition here? There's a common thought today that a film has to stress its important pieces of information repeatedly, or else the viewers won't notice or remember. So we see the kids 3 times, we see Dom Cobb lying in the surf 3 times, and we even see this guard twice. There's also some weird stuff going on. There are actually 2 scenes here inside Saito's palace. There's this first one, which takes place without Cobb, and then there's a second one that starts when they drag him in. And personally, I don't think they should have done it that way. There's no reason to use 2 scenes here when they could have done it in 1. I also don't think this scene should have been 4 shots. There just isn't all that much going on in it. But like I said, Hollywood filmmakers tend to cut a lot these days. The average shot is only 4 to 6 seconds long, and that has consequences for every other part of the film. For instance, it doesn't give the actors much time in which to work. Their performances get all chopped up and interrupted, and that rules out any kind of sustained action. Actors have always had to deal with that. Film's always been edited, but today it's really at an extreme. I've read that the reasoning for this is that filmmakers are afraid of losing their viewers' attention, because, we all have attention deficit disorder. Me, I think that's insulting. In fact, I'd find the constant cutting more distracting than anything. I'd rather be able to look at what's happening and think about the composition, why the filmmaker has chosen to make a cut, to juxtapose one shot with another, but with films like Inception, you don't really have too much time to do that. So I went ahead and I calculated the average shot length in these 3 scenes, and that's just how many seconds each shot lasts. As you can see, Inception's numbers are pretty typical, between 4 to 6 seconds per shot. Overall, the average shot length for these 3 scenes was just under 5 seconds. Now, other people have used software to calculate the total ASL, getting a 3.1 figure, so this opening is actually pretty languid compared to the rest of the film. I'm guessing that the later action sequences speed things up. And for comparison's sake, here's how Inception compares to recent Michael Bay. About the same. So quick, what was the opening shot of the film? We just watched it, so we should remember it, right? But even if you do, how well do you remember it? Could you draw a picture of it? Well, here it is, and I myself don't think it's all that memorable. It's just some waves crashing on some rocks. Overall, there's nothing all that dramatic about these shots or this opening scene, unlike in many classic films. And I'm not even talking about great movies like Citizen Kane or Stanley Kubrick films like Clockwork Orange or The Shining. Of course, those are art films where we expect gorgeous, careful compositions. Inception is more of a summer popcorn action film. But compare its opening to other similar movies, like Star Wars or Fight Club, or any of the Indiana Jones movies, even the most recent abysmal Crystal Skull. It's just not as good. Or even compare it to Christopher Nolan's own Dark Knight. The Joker's bank robbery there is just much, much better. Overall, the cinematography in Inception isn't that memorable. With the exception of a few parts, namely the special effects sequences, it's dull. It's mostly close-ups of people and things that Nolan wants us to look at. The rapid cutting means that we don't have much time to register each shot. So the compositions need to be pretty simple. And every shot we've seen so far is pretty simple, containing usually just one thing. There's an exception coming right up, and I'll point it out. For the most part, we're right on top of everything, being told precisely what to look at. In the vast majority of the shots, the photography is very shallow and the backgrounds are all blurry. This shot's actually an exception because you can see the background. But for the most part, they're there just to add flavor. We're not supposed to really look at them. Oh, here's that complex shot. It's the next one. Both Dom Cobb and Saito are in the same frame. But notice how even here the focus shifts and it directs us where to look. So all these close-ups, just like the editing, severely limit the acting. Leonardo DiCaprio and Ken Watanabe have only their faces and their voices to work with, and sometimes they get their hands. I don't know about you, but I find that boring. Every time Leonardo DiCaprio is in a movie these days, I know I'm going to spend a lot of the time just looking at a close-up of him looking anxious. And it's just so depressing compared to other movies. Again, I mean simple action movies like The Adventures of Robin Hood, or again, Star Wars, or The Princess Bride. I mean, just try to imagine those films if they spent most of their time in close-ups on the actors' faces. So I went ahead and I counted the number of wider shots in these opening scenes, and I included the mid-shots here, which are still pretty close from the actor's waist up. More than half of the shots so far in the film have been close-ups, from the shoulders up. So once again, when you watch Inception, you're spending most of your time looking at the actors' faces. Okay, this third time through, let's think about the movie's perspective, which is to say, let's think about what we know and how and why we know it. We begin with the waves and the rocks. These are establishing shots. They're just telling us where the action is located. We don't know where we are yet, or who's there, or even what's happening. Now we see Cobb. And right after this, we see what he's looking at. Notice the blurring here? It's a point of view shot representing his psychology. He's groggy. These point of view shots repeat. Cobb's looking at his kids, or he thinks he sees his kids. So we think understandably that Inception is going to be from his perspective and deal with his psychology, which is true for most of the film. He's our protagonist and he's in almost every scene. But notice how right away our perspective immediately starts changing. We get some shots here from the guard's point of view. And this is also from the guard's perspective. And now we're in a more omniscient point of view. Cobb isn't in this scene. And this is another reason why I think including it was a mistake. Because the film used its first few shots to establish one thing, and then it immediately started contradicting itself. And why? Why have this second scene at all? What does it really tell us? Why not just have one scene that takes place inside the palace? It can start right here with the guards dragging Dom Cobb in, and they seat him at the table and they give him his bowl of gruel. And then one guard gives Saito the gun and the top and speaks Japanese. And Cobb, who's seated at the table, sees this and hears this, and so we see it and we hear it. There's no need to subtitle the Japanese, it's obvious enough what they're saying. And then Saito starts talking to Cobb, just like here. The opening of a movie is a privileged space. It teaches us how to watch it. What Inception teaches us is that it's going to use tons of close-ups, shallow focus photography, insert shots, that it's going to cut constantly and point everything out to us, and shift its perspective whenever it feels like it, whenever it's convenient. So what it's telling us is that, despite any illusion of mystery, the style will be entirely straightforward. So in other words, it's not a mysterious, thought-provoking film. It's a mindless entertainment. Okay, so let's pass through it one last time, making just some general comments. Notice how in these establishing shots, the focus is already fairly shallow and we're very close in, on top of the action. Also, the blur effect in this next shot with the kid, it's not very well done, really. I don't know, it looks like a filter somebody applied to the film. And the handheld camera work here, too. The jerkiness is so slick and calculated. It looks very artificial. It's also a bit inconsistent. Why is the camera moving at all, too? Filmmakers today, they love moving the camera. It's another trick they have to keep lazy audiences interested. Okay, those things are just nitpicking. A larger problem with these scenes is that, in the end, none of them matter. Just think about it. Despite the fact that these are the earliest scenes that we see, they happen pretty late in the film's narrative. Later in the movie, we learn that Saito has died one level up in a dream, and so Cobb has shot himself to drop down into limbo to rescue him. And that's really it. When we finally make it back to this point very late in the movie, Cobb and Saito talk some more, and then they leave. Ultimately, there's no real reason to start the film right here. These scenes don't accomplish anything, and they don't have any real consequence. Also, there's a real missed opportunity here at the end of this scene. What happens is that there's going to be a sound bridge, or some dialogue from the next scene is going to intrude on this scene. We hear Cobb asking Saito, "What is the most resilient parasite?" And this is right before we cut to the film's earliest point, which is the first meeting between Cobb and Saito. But the cut happens before Cobb finishes delivering his line, and so we see Saito while Cobb is still saying the word parasite. And that's totally wrong. We shouldn't cut until Cobb finishes that line so we can read it as referring to him. Because Cobb is a very flawed and dangerous character. He planted the idea in his wife's brain that caused her to kill herself, and the whole movie concerns his scheme to plant an idea in another character's brain as an act of illegal corporate sabotage. And it would be really nice to have that self-critical reading, but because of the way the film cuts, it's difficult to construct that reading. Okay, here's the line. It's just a mindless cut. And that's the whole problem with Inception. It's extremely formulaic filmmaking, habitual and mindless, like so many other movies today. It just pretends to be a more complicated film than that. And if you like it, that's totally fine. It's nice to like things and I wouldn't want to stop you. But objective arguments can be made that the film is not very well made. And I hope this video has convinced you of that. If not, I hope you've at least enjoyed watching it. Thank you.